Hi, I'm Rick.
Hi, I'm Oscar. Rick, another session about Azure Static Web Apps?
Yes, another session on static web apps since there is a lot happening, but there's not a lot happening. So let me explain what I mean with this.
Okay.
The first release, or first preview release of Azure Static Web Apps was around Build last year.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden there was this new service that did static website hosting and functions as a backend with JavaScript and TypeScript functions and all JavaScript frontend, so Angular, Vue, React. And it was just there all of a sudden.
Yeah.
And then we didn't hear some stuff about Azure Static Web Apps for a long period of time. And then right before Ignite, there was this big update with C# functions as a backend and with Blazor as a static web app. So a lot happened then, and now it's been quiet for quite some time again.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm guessing that maybe with the next build, there will be another big update. But we can now already see some
But there
stuff.
is some news, right?
There is. Of course, there's news. But there's also some stuff already happening. So they're looking into application insights, adding it to static web apps, and being able to use Azure DevOps as the pipeline instead of GitHub. So there's some stuff going on.
I think the plan was also, like, this is what they said on Build, like, look at this is it, use it, it's free.
Yep.
And we would love to see how you make stuff with this.
And then probably they just wanted a lot of feedback to see, okay, what they're
measuring what people are doing, or even what they're trying and doesn't work yet.
Failing, yeah.
So interesting to see indeed. And like one of the questions is, can we do this from DevOps? Because if you want to do it from a business,
and your code is in DevOps, then you're not going to create a GitHub organization just for this one static web app.
Oh, and indeed, the question for C# functions was obvious from the start, I think.
Yeah.
But interesting to see that we're probably going towards a general availability of a service that is a bit more complete as we saw it last year.
Yes, and then if you look at the development experience, which Microsoft thinks is very important of their services before actually GAing them, is currently the development experience on static web apps is you run locally for instance, your Angular application. You start it locally, and you locally start your functions backend, and then you make sure the two can talk together, but there's nothing tying them together that is static web apps.
And it's a bit different than putting it in your repo and it gets deployed, because then some magic happens, it gets combined, and
then it's there.
You don't have that option locally.
No, true.
Well,
and then also, one of the most important things that I think is now available in static web apps is the fact that you can have authentication out of the box. So you can define the routes and the rules of accessing them through a routes.json file, which is now, with the new version, is or will be changed. I need to find out, into a Azure web app.config.json. That
as
holds,
a part of that.
Yeah, that holds more configuration and also routes. But that's something that we could never test locally because we don't have that authentication. Well, that's something that's being solved by the CLI.
Okay.
So if we dive into my machine right now, we can see that we're on the Azure organization and then Static Web Apps CLI. So if we scroll down a bit, we can see this awesomely colored icon for Static Web Apps CLI. And then, also known as SWA CLI, it serves as a local development tool for Azure Static Web Apps. So it can build your local static app and your local API. Yeah.
But there are a lot of stacks in there.
Yep.
Like, and also on Static Web Apps on Azure, it will do that for you, because but that requires some NPM or Angular or all kinds of things around it, Blazor.
Yeah.
And compilation, we have the function host to do that. We already have a lot of CLIs.
Yep.
Are these all baked in as a reference, or how should I see this?
That's a good question. So if you look at how static web apps are currently compiled, they have this separate action under GitHub that determines which application it thinks it sees, which framework it sees.
It's managed in the build.
Yes.
Yeah.
So as far as I'm concerned, I think that that's what they're doing with the SWA CLI as well. However, you can also leverage the power of your local dev server. So if you have func host start to start your backend, you can tie that in with the SWA CLI. And if you run ng-serve for your Angular frontend, you could also tie that in with your SWA. And then it combines all of those together with the authentication and authorization.
Yep.
to make sure that you get the entire solution up and running on your local dev machine. So looking down a bit, here we can see that this is all interesting, but we'll add a link to the description. So what you see here is that all of the different types of front ends and their default ports that are being used.
Recognize some of them.
Yeah, I do too. And then you could, for instance, do ng-serve and then get a URL for your front end.
Yeah.
And then get to the SWA CLI, say, okay, so I would like to run a static web app.
Yeah.
This is the URL where the front end runs. This is the URL where the back end runs. Now tie them together.
Okay, so the developer experience, for instance, for ng with an ng-serve and then all your watch on it and just
with the hot reloading.
That still works, but you're reverse proxying it.
Yes.
And so it's always running depending on your current pipeline. So you also run the func host for Azure Functions, for instance.
You can. You don't have to. If you look at this, then we see the high-level architecture, and like you said, at the heart of the SWA CLI is a reverse proxy. That's also explicitly what they state here. And then they have an auth emulator, a static content server, and a serverless API server that can all be served through the SWA. So if we now dive into Visual Studio Code, oh, by the way, I think this is all the way up here. So let me make sure that I point you towards this disclaimer as well. It's still in developer preview and not yet ready for prime time. You will encounter issues, so please report them or help us fix them. So they're working on it.
Yes. But that not prevent that you from running this in production.
Of course not. So if we look at my machine right now, we're in Visual Studio Code. This is the ASWA example that I had earlier. So this is a Angular front end and a JavaScript backend with function APIs.
Yeah.
Sorry, with functions that
TypeScript,
implement
right?
an API. It's TypeScript, yeah, thanks. And then the cool thing here is I could do SWA, so the static web app. And for instance, if I say start from this location, I'm going to make my console just a little bit bigger. Let's run it from here. Now what we see, we need to go back to the top. Oh, it's going to stay here. So what we see right here.
Pretty colors.
Yes, but we can see it found the SWA configuration file.
Yeah.
.yaml. So it now says that the GitHub action workflow that was generated for you to publish your Azure Static Web App is actually seen as the SWA configuration file because
that is the description of your service.
Yeah, because it says where your front end is, where the dist folder is, where your back end is, and
it's somewhere in between like a build file and a compose definition.
Yeah, so in this case, I didn't completely adhere to the structure that you normally would have, because if you have a folder that's called API, that would be the folder that it runs as the functions backend.
Yeah.
Well, mine is called ASWA-API, so this doesn't work for me. So as it says, I'm going to hit Control-C to stop the server, and then
your terminal crashes.
This, it just exits the terminal, which is horrible. So I'm not entirely happy with how the .NET terminal works in Visual Studio Code currently. But let's go and see if we can run the functions locally. So I'm here in the ASWA-API location, and I'll just do func host start to have the application.
And this could also be an F5 in a Visual Studio, I guess.
Yes, because in the end what this does is it starts a localhost 7071 that listens for API calls. And then it doesn't matter how it gets there, it just matters that it's there. And then in Visual Studio Code, we're going to go, and I prepared a little bit here. So let's close down this message and let's make this a little bit bigger so that we have a little bit more space to look at it. Here you can see that we have the SWA CLI.
Start.
The action that we do is a start. And then we say our dist folder for the front end is here.
So this is your dist folder. So it's your output. That's already a compiled ng build.
Yeah, ng build
result.
-- prod, and then the result of that will be hosted. I could also say, give it an explicit location where my Angular is actually running at this moment. So ng-serve, and then it will use that one to pull in.
And there's, is there also, because now you pre-built it, is there also a way that this will start your build, so your ng-serve itself
well
for you, or?
Yeah, if you don't specify anything, then
Then it will do that.
it will do that. Yes.
But this is having control. Like this thing is fine, leave it alone. Don't
Yeah.
want to wait for it anymore.
Yeah.
And your API, you're actually mapping to the port you're running in the other
Yes.
console.
So that's where we specify here --API equals localhost 7071. So this could also be the location where the API is to be found, if it's other than just API. And now if I run this, then SWA is going to start. And we can see that it uses the API dev server at localhost 7071. The auth server is listening on port 4242. And the SWA itself is listening on 4280. And then it's combining all of those into port, in this case 4200, to be able to run those. So
yeah, and the auth server is not something you really define on the only thing is that route definition you have.
Yes.
So and it will magically create that endpoint.
Yeah, and it will pick those up for you.
And put it in front of those routes you're protecting.
Yeah, and then now if we refresh this with the developer tools open, we can see that I at least hope, yeah, there we go. We have this values call to the backend, which actually is a call to the
/API in this case, and
And
we'll go deeper to the other port.
Yeah, and then it shows it here in the front end because that's what the front end does. It doesn't do that much, but it does prove that the concept.
Yeah, and I'll host it related, like it's online, so also no issues with setting all kinds of security headers.
Yes, true.
So the dev loop is like almost identical in the end, or the result in dev, while being able to debug is it's identical as the result you had in if you deploy.
Yes.
And that was the biggest issue going into development mode, because you're testing them separately, combining it, hope it works.
Yeah, and then especially, so you could of course have your Angular application have an environment and then an environment for local, and locally point to localhost 7071, and then
Yeah, but everyone will bake their own construction there, and
sure. But the authentication is something we could never do locally.
definitely. Yeah.
But now we can. So I think that what we're seeing here is that they're actually starting to prepare everything around static web apps to be able to have it be GA somewhere in the, I hope, near future.
Yeah.
So I think this is a very good addition to the developer ecosystem around static web apps. And it makes it even more accessible since, I think it was really targeted initially at full stack developers and people that are used to using Node.js or something relatively anything JavaScript based for a backend and a frontend.
Yeah.
And then this is something that really targets those developers to also enable them to host their stuff in an Azure environment.
Yeah, we really didn't have a spot for that. It became really, we could always host really cheap in Azure with storage and all, but it was a bit, you needed to know where to find the bits. And this is a direct competitor to some of the other more static environments.
It certainly is. And
I'm
I
curious
hope
about the price actually, because that GA will mean that they need to name some numbers there.
Yeah.
But shouldn't be high, I think, if I see the service.
I'm guessing, but I'm not really sure, that we will see a free tier with very basic functionality, and then a slightly paid tier if you want to go premium, like with multiple services in Azure.
Yeah.
But maybe that's just hoping.
Well, yeah. Well, it looks powerful. I would definitely transfer my own private site for that and have some functionality there, some form or whatever.
I might have 1 or 2 applications up and running in static web apps currently.
Well, thank you for this. It looks amazing. We're definitely getting there with this service.
True.
It's getting mature. Yeah, cool. I learned a lot.
Cool. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
See you next time.
Bye.